From the most trusted names in local news, KDPG Sunday Edition.
Good morning. Welcome to the KDPG Sunday Edition. I'm Paul Martino. President Trump declaring success in northern Syria. A short-term ceasefire declared permanent this week. The president lifted sanctions against Turkey as a reward for making a deal to stop the fighting. Says he's fulfilling a campaign promise to bring U.S. troops back home from the Middle East. But the situation is fraught with danger. Some troops have been left to guard oil fields in Syria. Not everyone agrees with the president's declaration of victory. This morning on the KDPG Sunday Edition, we've got an expert who can help us better understand the challenge. Julia Santucci has more than a decade of experience in national security and foreign policy, including work at the CIA and State Department. She served on the National Security Council in the Obama administration. She's now a senior lecturer at the University of Pittsburgh. Joining me, Jerry Micco, Senior Assistant Managing Editor for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Welcome all and good morning. Boy, you come with some amazing credentials. What was that like sitting on the National Security Council?
It was the most intense and also the most exciting moments of my career. So we worked really, really hard, and I was one of many civil servants that were detailed to the White House to support the president. We worked hard, but we believed in what we were trying to accomplish and what America stood for in the world, and so it was really rewarding.
What was going on in Syria at that time, and how did we get to where we are today?
So at that time, the Obama administration was grappling with what started as a pro-democracy movement in Syria, of the Syrian people really pushing back against the brutal Assad regime, but which quickly evolved into the civil war that we're still seeing the effects of today. And so while I was at the White House from 2012 to 2014, we were trying to decide how the United States could best support those pro-democracy forces in Syria, not embolden extremists, and respond to Bashar al-Assad's brutal use of force against civilians, including the chemical weapons attacks.
President Obama criticized for not doing enough.
President Obama has been criticized for not doing enough. He was criticized at the time, even by some within his own administration, and has subsequently been criticized for that decision.
Now here we are today. What do you think of what's going on this week?
I think we went from a really bad situation in Syria to a disastrous one for U.S. interests. There are no good options in Syria, and it's really difficult for any president to decide what to do. But I think what we saw over the past 3 weeks is President Trump responding to a phone call that he had with a foreign leader, the Turkish President Erdogan, deciding to pull out U.S. troops without any real apparent discussion or policy process with his foreign policy advisors and key military decision makers. And what we've seen is the beneficiaries of that decision are the brutal Assad regime and his foreign backers, Russia and Iran. The losers are the Syrian people, the Kurds, and the United States.
So as we look forward, we know now that Russia's the broker over there. Russia with Turkey is going to broker whatever happens over there. So what's the United States role going to be, say, in a month from now? Where will we be? What will we be doing besides guarding 5 oil fields?
That's a really great question, and one that I have as well when I read this. And it really troubles me to hear the president say things like, well, it's good to just leave it up to these powers to determine what happens in Syria. We don't need to be involved there. I think the United States does need to be involved around the world. Our interests are not just here, our interests are global. And when we pull back from that role, it could have dangerous consequences.
We've opened the door to Russia?
We've opened the door to Russia and Iran, and we shouldn't forget about Iran. I mean, Iran uses Syria as a pathway to arm Hezbollah. Hezbollah attacked the U.S. Embassy in the 1980s, killing over 200 American Marines. Hezbollah has consistently attacked Israel, our close ally in the Middle East. So this should worry us that Assad, Russia, and Iran have the upper hand.
Where does ISIS fit in all this? One of the things you heard early on when this was announced and the troops were being pulled out was ISIS prisoners were escaping and going back into the theater. So what does that mean? Where do they fit in? And do you see ISIS kind of gaining traction again after it had been put down pretty well?
Yeah, so I mean, the U.S. military and intelligence services have consistently warned us that although the counter-ISIS coalition was extremely successful, ISIS is not gone in the Middle East. It's defeated but not yet dead. And so I think now it's an open question of what will happen. We know that over 100 ISIS prisoners have escaped in the confusion from what had been Kurdish guarded prisons. Mm-hmm. We don't know where they are. We don't know where they will go. They may stay and try to regroup in Syria or Iraq. They may go to Europe and try and perpetrate attacks there. They may come to the United States. There are still over 70,000 more prisoners, some of them ISIS affiliated, some of them civilians that have been wrapped up, that are under continued Kurdish watch. And so we don't know in the continued confusion what will happen with them.
What about the president's argument that this has been a war going on for hundreds of years and we can't keep putting resources and our men and women at risk in the Middle East?
I mean, I think
isolationist, right?
I am a globalist, and so I would push back on the point that the United States has no interest there and that we should just come home. And even though the president says that, that's not actually what we're doing. I mean, you mentioned in the opening that U.S. troops are remaining in Syria to guard the oil wells, and we've seen actually a deployment of even more armored divisions there. We also have a military presence in the Middle East, and we will most likely continue to have that. So the question is, are we using it effectively to meet our interests? And that's where I don't see evidence that the president's doing that.
So we'll have a forever presence in the Middle East?
I don't want to say forever, but I think at least, at least in the near term, sure.
You mentioned the oil. Sometimes the president sounds as if it's going to be our oil, or we've got the oil. Whose oil is that?
Well, I think that's still up for debate. I mean, the oil right now is still in a Kurdish and opposition-controlled area of Syria. Certainly, the Assad regime and Russia would like to eventually take back control of all of Syria, including those oil wells. It is not our oil. The United States does not control it. We are currently helping to protect it. But I think that will probably be one of the next front lines in Syria, is who can take control of that.
Yesterday, the Iraqi president told the United States, you can put your troops here, you can put them here for a month, and we want you out. Is this just really a stop station before they come home? Is that what's going to happen? Because once that group comes home, we only have maybe that one small presence in northeastern Syria. How long will that stay? I mean, my question is, it almost seems like a rolling policy, but there isn't an end game. Is there an end game here for this, for the United States?
That's what seems really unclear. And this is where I think what's missing in all of this is U.S. diplomacy. And we should remember that the military is one of many foreign policy tools. But diplomacy should be our first option. And so it troubled me to see Russia and Turkey negotiating a ceasefire agreement without the United States even being there. Without the United States being present, without the United States helping to move that process in a way that meets our interests. And it doesn't seem that the president has any interest in supporting diplomatic efforts in the region. Concerns about Turkey leaving NATO? I am concerned about the fact that a NATO ally just negotiated an agreement with Russia, the very entity that NATO was designed to protect against, and did so without seemingly any U.S. or other NATO ally input. It's very concerning.
What do you think the implications are?
I think the implications are that the United States is losing influence in the Middle East and in the world. That we're no longer being turned to as the broker of peace deals, that we're no longer being turned to as the force to support democracy and human rights around the world, and that if we are willing to abandon our allies in the Middle East, who's to say that we won't do that elsewhere as well? I think it's causing the world to really wonder what the United States stands for.
Question of trust.
It is. It's absolutely a question of trust, and trust matters a lot in foreign policy.
Are the Kurds the Kurds are in trouble if they have to face the Turkish army? They're not equipped to do that without our help. The Kurds have been our allies since, I want to say, since forever. So they really had no place at the table for this. But they are a major player. What happens to the Kurds? Where do they go next?
That's another open-ended question, and some analysts are predicting that there will be another refugee crisis in Syria, which we saw the effects of the last refugee crisis in Syria, which are still ongoing. There are still an estimated 5 million Syrian refugees and another 6 million displaced within the country, and this will only add to that. So where do they go? We don't know. I mean, will they flee to other parts of Syria? Will they flee to the Kurdish-controlled areas in Iraq, try to make their way to Europe, or stay and be, potentially killed by the Turks and Turkish-aligned forces? And there's already been some really just brutal reports, including Hervin Khalaf, a Kurdish political leader. It's a woman Kurdish political leader, and she was just brutally murdered. And that, I think, sends a really chilling signal to the Kurds who stay. You
lecture at Pitt. Are college students paying attention to this? Are they interested in this? How are they reacting?
My students are absolutely engaged and really interested in this. So I teach in the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. Most of my students want to go have careers as civil servants or foreign service officers or military officers. They want to work for the U.S. government in foreign policy. They want to serve. And so I think they are likewise troubled by what seems to be the United States receding, troubled in a very transactional way that the jobs aren't there the way they were when I entered the government in 2005, but also troubled by open questions about what the United States stands for in the world.
Julia, we very much enjoyed your insights this morning.
Thanks
for coming in.
Happy to be
and
here.
visit us again.
Anytime.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Coming up, Pittsburgh wouldn't be Pittsburgh without its rivers, and the city's riverfronts are undergoing a renaissance. We'll talk with the new man in charge at River Life when the KDPG Sunday Edition continues.